Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football, the Penn State head coaching search. I quietly heating up. And the reason I say quietly is look, the national media seemingly largely ignoring this head coaching search, really distracted with what's going on with Lane Kiffin. I'm going to say this right off the bat. The Penn State beat reporters, the local guys, doing a really good job. I'm getting a lot of information from a lot of those message boards and a lot of the beat reporters. So shout out to beat reporters for doing a really good job covering this. Sounds like we have some new candidates to talk about. Hand up right off the bat. I have some strong takes. And look, I fully recognize we are not all going to agree on who the best hire that Penn State can make is. An open invitation to the Penn State fans. Let it rip in the comments section, whether you agree with me, whether you disagree. I can't thank you guys enough. The amount of support from the Penn State fans been amazing. I've been having a blast. And we've even chopped it up around some Penn State wrestling. Many of y'all know I'm a Hawkeye wrestling fan, and so we've been talking about some wrestling in the comment section as well. Appreciate you guys. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Without further ado, let's get into this one. Let's start with Terry Smith. There's some momentum growing, right? From the fan base, from the players in the locker room. It sounds like some of the boosters and administration might be getting behind Terry Smith as well. And I don't think it'd be the best hire. And let's recognize why it could be a good hire. Like, number one, Terry Smith is a Penn State lifer. We've seen a very similar situation just play out at Georgia Tech with Brent Key. Georgia Tech crushed it with Brent Key, right? This is not me getting up here and saying if Penn State goes with Terry Smith, it is doomed to fail, because I certainly don't believe that. My pushback is he's never been a head coach, which doesn't prohibit him from being a good head coach, but there's a lot of decisions that you need to make as not just the interim guy, but the full head coach guy that Terry Smith's never really had to make before, right? Coordinator hires, coaching staff decisions, talking to the donors and boosters. That certainly is a concern. My second concern is, does beating Michigan State and beating Nebraska and potentially beating Rutgers this weekend is that the sample size? Are those the wins that say, yeah, that's the guy that's going to be an upgrade from James Franklin? And I think lastly, why did Penn State decide to move on from James Franklin in the first place? Yeah, the classic terminology is, oh, because he couldn't win the big game. And I know that was a large reason why Penn State decided to move on. I think the real reason, or the most important reason, was, man, it felt a little bit stale. Like, it felt like there was a ceiling that was hit. And I think Penn State was interested in finding out if there's another gear that we can reach. Does promoting a guy that's been on James Franklin's staff for a decade necessarily is the change up you're looking for, or the change of pace you're looking for? I guess what I'm saying is Terry Smith feels like a very safe and easy hire. If Penn State was interested in being safe and being easy, you would have just kept James Franklin, right? If you're looking for a changeup and trying to see if this program can reach that next step, is, and Terry Smith's been on the staff for a decade, is that, I don't see the changeup. I don't see the change of pace there with Terry Smith. Again, this is not me saying he'd be a bad hire, just would not be my hire number one because of those reasons. I'll tell you, the other name that's getting the most amount of buzz is Bob Chesney. At least this sounds like. Now, this seems to be, if Penn State wants him, they can have him, right? Because it seems like Penn State, UCLA, it's up to Bobby Chesney. Bob Chesney's picking Penn State all day long, right? Here's the thing that excites me regardless, and I probably should have noted this right off the jump. Regardless of who becomes the next head coach, you feel like they are fully ready to put the full weight of this program behind that coach. You wouldn't have moved on from James Franklin if you weren't ready. And so whoever is going to be the guy is going to have the resources to work with, the firepower to work with. And I think the intriguing thing about Bob Chesney, this cat won everywhere he's been. Everyone you talk to in the landscape, or who knows Bobby Chesney or who has seen him do his work, glowing remarks. It feels very similar to John Summerall at Tulane. The question is, all right, can Bob Chesney or John Summerall jump up to the Power 4 level and have the success? and that's a question mark. Everything you hear about both of those cats, glowing returns about how they go about their business and run a program. I would prefer Bob Chesney, even though there are very similar question marks you have with Bob Chesney. To me, it's the changeup, and it's the lack thereof of a known ceiling, right? And that's what Penn State's looking for. We kind of knew what the ceiling was of James Franklin. Bob Chesney, it could not work out. Maybe Penn State's too big of a job and it doesn't work out, but also you don't know what he could do if it kind of feels like Kurt Signetti. And I'm not just saying that because they're both coming from JMU. I'm saying that because they've just won everywhere they've been. And so you put him at Penn State. He's Bob Chesney. Here's the best way to say it. I'm sorry, I'm rambling. Bob Chesney has maximized every program that he's been at. No question about it. What happens if he maximizes Penn State? That's the sell on Bob Chesney. Can I give you my sneaky favorite hire? And some of the Penn State fans know this, but I want to circle back. Jeff Brohm. Let me just point this out. 2 weeks ago, there was some buzz about Jeff Brohm getting an extension, right? Because Jeff Brohm's name was pretty popular. Penn State, Florida, potentially LSU. That extension has not taken place, right? I don't think Jeff Brohm's off the market. Here's my sell on Jeff Brohm, and I get there are question marks about Jeff Brohm and what he does recruiting the high school ranks, and I get that, and that's got to be part of the vetting process, right? You're interviewing Jeff Brohm for the job. You want to make it very clear that, hey, in order to win at Penn State, we got to do more on the recruiting trail than you've done at Louisville. And look, he'll inherently get better at recruiting because he's recruiting at Penn State and not Louisville, but that's the concern you have. The selling point is, what has been the biggest prohibitor of Penn State reaching where they want to go? When you stack up against Ohio State, where's the Penn State's been a very similar team with Ohio State along the lines of scrimmage, right? What was always the difference? It felt like it was offensive play calling. It felt like it was quarterback play. You bring in Jeff Brohm, and outside of Ryan Day and maybe Lincoln Riley at USC, you have the advantage from a quarterback development standpoint and an offensive play calling standpoint over every other team in the Big Ten. Jeff Brohm is the most criminally disrespected quarterback whisperer and offensive game plan guy that we see in the entire country. Go look at what he's done, going back to his days at Western Kentucky, or going back to his days at Purdue. I mean, Aiden O'Connell started off as a seventh string walk-on at Purdue, was starting games in the NFL last year, was an NFL draft pick, was an all Big Ten guy at Purdue. Then he goes to Louisville. Tyler Shuck. Tyler Shuck was a college football journeyman that really couldn't make it any other program he went to, from Oregon to Texas Tech, comes to Louisville his last year. All of a sudden, Tyler Shuck, top 50 NFL draft pick, starting in the NFL right now. In ways that Penn State has not experienced, you bring in Jeff Brohm, quarterback advantage over almost every team in this conference, offensive play calling advantage against every team in this conference. And that to me has been one of the biggest drawbacks, or the anchors, that Penn State has experienced. Penn State going to be good along the lines of scrimmage, man. I think we need a guy that can get these quarterbacks. I think you need a guy that can get quarterbacks into this program and maximize these quarterbacks. And if you do that, that to me is how you get to the ceiling. I'll give you one more real quick, Brian Hartline. And it's a risky one, right? Never been a head coach. Very similar to me with I shouldn't say that. I get the risk involved. Here's the selling point for Brian Hartline. One, you can recognize the drawback, the cons are never been a head coach. Okay, period. Got that. Pros, Penn State wants to go where Ohio State's been. Go look at how these kind of hires have panned out. And I always use the example of Dan Lanning at Oregon. Oregon was good, they weren't great, and they wanted to get to being great. And say, well, there are a few programs that are where we want to be. That was Georgia, that was maybe Alabama, or maybe Ohio State, and said, hey, what coordinator from some of those teams can we go and put in Oregon and help us get there? Dan Lanning knew what it took because he worked under Kirby Smart, because he worked under Nick Saban. You bring Dan Lanning to Eugene, and he pretty much just runs the things the way Kirby Smart did, and that's where Oregon is. Like, to me, I put Oregon at the top tier of the sport right now. Brian Hartline feels very similar. You know, he 1 year under Urban Meyer, then Ryan Day takes over and has worked with Ryan Day for about a decade. Brian Hartline knows what it feels like and knows what it looks like to run a program or to be at least part of a program that is operating at an elite level. What if he does that and translates that to Penn State? He'd recruit the heck out of the state of Ohio. He'd recruit the heck out of the regions that Penn State needs to recruit. Brian Hartline would recruit. Last one's Kalen DeBoer, and I get there's a lot of people get their laughs in, right? Get your laughs in. Oh, Kalen DeBoer ain't leaving from Alabama, and I get that. What happens if it gets uncomfortable? They let's revisit this conversation Saturday night after we see the result. I'm not saying Kalen DeBoer would leave. I'm not saying Alabama would push him out. Let's just revisit that conversation after we see the result of the Iron Bowl Saturday night. We'll close it out there. I think there'll be a decision relatively soon here. Very interested to see how it plays out. A lot of different coaches can win at Penn State, man. There's no doubt about that. We'll close it out there. Appreciate you guys. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. We'll talk to y'all later.